Do most of you get the thing working? Yes? Okay, so if you didn't get it in time, just check out the solution branch to see where things are going wrong, and make sure to read the test error logs, because most of the time you can actually read them and figure out what's going wrong. Okay, so we're done with the reactivity system. We got something very basic working. And if inside the auto-run functions, you're doing some DOM manipulations, you've essentially built a tiny reactivity engine that can automatically keep your state and DOM in sync, right? So that's the very simple version of how Vue's update system actually works. And next, we are going to take a little detour into another topic. Let's talk about writing plugins. So you probably used a plugin before with Vue.use. And how many of you have read the page about writing plugins in the docs? No one?
Glanced.
Glanced? OK. All right, so we're going to take a... So essentially, a plugin is just a function that receives Vue as the first argument, and optionally, second argument options. And then you do something with Vue inside your plugin. That's the higher level view of it. But some of the commonly used techniques when you're writing plugins involves this Vue DOM mixing API. How many of you have used mixins? OK. So so mixins are essentially parts, reusable snippets or parts of Vue component options that can be mixed into an existing component. All right? So you can use them on a per component basis, but Vue.mixing is a global API that will apply a mixing to every instance created from then on. Right? So it's very powerful, but the greater the power, the greater the responsibility. So you don't do crazy things inside the global mixins, right? Because it affects every instance. But it's very commonly, if you want to apply some global functionality to your Vue app, you would be using global mixins. And usually it's a better idea to wrap this with a plugin interface, because plugins are automatically deduped. If you have multiple Vue.use calls to the same plugin, it'll prevent it from being applied over and over again. But Vue.mixing doesn't do that. So it's best practice to always wrap global mixins in a plugin interface. And it's also more consistent. When you see your entry script, you always see Vue.use, this plugin, that plugin. It's more consistent that way. And the other commonly used thing is this $options property, instance property. So probably not many of you know this thing exists. But this $options exists on every component. And this contains the merged, normalized options object of that specific instance. Because we know Vue component options can come from a lot of places. It can come from global mixins. It can come from the component's own definition. It can come from the options you pass to it when you're creating the instance. Right? And it can be also from an answered component if you have like further chains of Vue.extend along the way. So all of these options need to be merged and normalized into this final options object for that instance, and that is $options for each instance. And interestingly, you can actually, this also contains any custom options that you added to that component. So it doesn't have to be a built-in option. So we'll just merge everything in here. So our exercise is going to leverage these knowledge and write a simple plugin. Let's go into the repository. We can close the first directory now and go into plugin and go into 2.1.md. And our goal is to create a plugin that teaches Vue components to handle a custom rules option. The rules option expects an object that specifies validation rules for data in the component. So notice this usage example. This rules option doesn't exist in Vue's own API. It's completely custom. If you just add this to a vanilla Vue component, it doesn't do anything. Vue will just ignore it, but it doesn't complain about it. But if inside this component's created hook, and you try to do this $options rules, you actually get this object here. All right? So this provides us with an interesting opportunity to do things to this instance based on this custom option. And notice that we don't want the consumers of our plugin to always have to manually create this hook in order to access this thing. So we can abstract this away inside a mixing, right? So because my mixing equals this. And what we can do is inside this mixing, we can check for the existence of this custom rule. If this rule exists, we can do something about it, right? And going further, if we apply this mixing globally, we've essentially taught every Vue instance how to deal with this custom rules option, all right? And going one step further, if we take this global mixing operation and put it inside a plugin, okay, so Vue plugins can be just a function. So the simplest form is just this. Okay, so sometimes your plugin can also take the more verbose object format, which exposes the install function. This is essentially the same thing, just alternative interface. Okay, so this is how we this is the boilerplate for creating a plugin. When you call vue.use this plugin, it'll apply this global mixing, which will teach every Vue instance created after that point to, they will invoke this created hook when they're created, and then we'll execute our code of checking for this custom rules option. Okay, so the exercise wants us to implement the plugin that knows how to handle this. Okay, so the end effect is if we provide these rules. So the rules is essentially saying for the property foo, which is here, we will have a validator function. This validator function will be run every time foo changes. And if it fails the validation, we will log this message to the console. Okay? And essentially, what you need to fill in is this part. And there are some hints at the end, too. So let's get to it. And we'll spend 10 minutes on this.
Can you switch back to the code you just
No? Yes, I'll show it for like a few more seconds, but we'll switch it out when we actually freeze the screen, okay? So essentially these are the hints here. So if you can't remember the code, you can go to the API, search for plugins, mixins, and $options is also documented in the API. Yeah, let's start. So I'll actually search for $options here.